Okay, so it's now 11, so we're going to get started with today's webinar. Thank you everybody for joining what is our third webinar in Grant Thornton's Employability series. Today's webinar is going to be based around commercial awareness and personal brand. If you've joined our previous webinars, then welcome back. If you haven't joined our webinars before, then you'll be able to find our first two webinars that we've hosted on our website. The first of those was on applications and CVs, and the second was on interviews, so how to really ace those interview processes that you might go through. So if you haven't seen them already, you can find those on our website. They link in really nicely to the content that we're going to be talking about today. I'm now going to pass over to my colleague, who you can see next to me, this way, Ursula Hughes, who's going to run through some housekeeping with you. If you have any audio problems, etc., she'll explain how you can go through those. Over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Louise. So before I introduce myself, I just want to go through some technical issues. So as you are aware, this is a unique and different situation for us all at the moment with working from home. So please do bear with us if we do experience any technical issues. We do have a team on hand to support you if you do experience any technical difficulties. So there is a question box under the panel, so please type in any questions you may have and we can come back to you. That question box can also be used for questions throughout the webinar, and we can go through those in our Q&A at the end of the session. There is also a short survey at the end of the webinar, so when you go to leave, so we would really appreciate your feedback if you can complete that.
Thanks, Urs. So if we just go ahead to introducing ourselves, so you're going to hear two voices mainly throughout the start of the call, and then we'll be introducing the guest speaker halfway through. Just to introduce the two voices that you're going to hear mainly at the start. So I am Louise Howkins. I'm on the left-hand side of the slide here, and I'm a senior resourcing advisor within the early careers team at Grant Thornton. I've worked here for approximately 10 years now, so pretty much straight after graduating university. And my first role here was screening every single application that came through from our graduate and school leaver population. So to put that into perspective, that can be about 11,000 applications, and I was responsible for reading and scoring every single one of those. I've worked my way up doing various roles within the early careers team, and my role now predominantly revolves around creating the materials, running these webinars, and working with students when they're looking to apply to us. I graduated from the University of Portsmouth. I studied French there, and I lived in the south of France for a year working as a secondary school teacher. Outside of work and study, what keeps me really busy? I have a 3.5-year-old who constantly keeps me on my toes. So he's not due to make an appearance today. His dad's taken him out for the hour so I can get some peace and quiet and hopefully talk to you guys about any interruptions today. So I'll hand over to Ursula, who will introduce herself and tell you a little bit more about her and what she does.
Great, thank you. So, hi everyone, my name is Ursula Hughes. I'm a resourcing advisor here at Grant Thornton, working on the early careers team alongside Louise. So I joined the firm back in 2018. So I've been here for just over 2 years now. Throughout my time at Grant Thornton, I seconded into our senior talent team, so supporting with the recruitment of our partners and directors. And then around 10 months ago, I think, I progressed them back into the early careers team on the graduate and school leaver recruitment. So quite a varied role within the firm and lots of exposure, which is really good. So a little bit about me. I studied at Liverpool John Moores University in graduating in 2015 in business and events management. As you can tell, I'm not from Liverpool. I'm actually from a small county in the north of Ireland. And then since graduating, I've met my now fiance. So we are due to get married this September, all being well given the current situation. So keeping everything crossed at the moment for that to go ahead. So now we will move on.
Okay, so looking at the agenda for today, today's agenda is split into two main parts. The first being commercial awareness, so understanding what commercial awareness is, how you can prepare for that, whether that be at interview stage or perhaps when you're at university or school. and what are the kind of questions that you might get asked when you go for interviews that link within that commercial awareness. I mentioned earlier that we will be welcoming a guest speaker. The guest speaker will be Eric Rivas, who is our employer brand manager at Grant Thornton, and he will talk you through around personal brand, so how you understand, build your brand, and how you can maintain that. There will be some time at the end for us to answer some questions. So as Ursula mentioned at the start, if you do have any questions, pop them into the question box and we can collate those as we go through. At the end, we'll answer as many as we have time to. If we don't get round to all of them, don't worry, we will follow up with an email that will have all of those questions answered sort of the week after the webinar, or as soon as we can possibly get those over to you. So we will answer as many as we can today. So if we move on to what commercial awareness is, I'm going to hand over to Ursula now, who's going to talk you through this.
Great, thank you. So a lot of you have probably seen the terminology commercial awareness being thrown around quite a lot in interview stages, application processes, and on company websites. So it does seem nowadays that almost every organisation wants their graduates and school leavers to be more commercially aware. And the most important thing is how can you go about showing those organisations that that is a skill that you do have. So I'm going to go through a little bit about what commercial awareness is. So simply, it's an understanding of how businesses work, what makes them tick, and how they connect with the world around them. And it's also important to understand how external factors such as COVID-19, for example, and Brexit can impact businesses in today's world. So in this session, we will talk you through the platforms that might help you sort of develop your commercial awareness, information that you want to source, and how to translate that into your interview technique. So as Louise mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, and we have ran a series of these now, with the one last week being around interview techniques. So hopefully today, when you have that understanding of commercial awareness, you can sort of bring the two together and bring this skill into your interview techniques, which will really help you going into an interview environment. So I'll move on now to Louise, and she will just talk you through how to prepare.
Thanks, Urs. So you might have a good understanding of what commercial awareness is, and obviously Ursula's just given us a backdrop there as to what commercial awareness is and how it really is important within the businesses that we work. What we're going to do now is give you some real tangible ways that you can prepare to increase your commercial awareness. So these will be things that you can do at school, at university, at home, particularly whilst we're in lockdown and have much more time on our hands than we're used to. It will give you a bit of an insight into some of the things that you can be doing to get you really ahead of the game. We're going to split this down into 3 sections. So the first section is going to look at 1 year before. So on the screen here, you can see that we have various boxes. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can have a look at them. Any that I don't bring up now, if you have any questions on them, pop them into the question box and we can ask them at the end. I'm going to look at 3 on this slide and talk you through how you can use some of these things to really increase your commercial awareness and bring that to the interviews with you. So the first is around joining societies. So whether you're a first-year university student walking around Freshers' Fair, not really sure of the university societies that you want to join, there are 2 types of societies that you might want to consider. The first is those societies that you really get enjoyment from. So whether that's sports societies, art societies, ones where you can really build your friends' networks. And the second are the ones that perhaps give you a little bit more business insight. So ones that we see quite regularly and that hold people in really good stead here at Grant Thornton are things like the accountancy societies, business societies, entrepreneurial societies, also things like debating societies, where you get a much wider breadth of issues that are currently affecting the country or globally as well. There are obviously much more than the ones that I've just mentioned below, but they're just a couple of examples of how societies can really help you increase that commercial awareness. The second is around work experience. So here at Grant Thornton, we offer work experience, and we certainly aren't alone in our industry and in other industries for offering this. We offer 2 types of work experience. One is for A-level students. So A-level students are Scottish Highers that are currently in year 12 or 13. And we also offer a 6-week summer internship for those students that are in their penultimate year of their university degree programme. Both of these offer brilliant insight into what our business does, how it runs, what some of our challenges are, and the opportunities for growth within our organisation. There's nothing more effective than being fully immersed within that business world. Within those 6 weeks that you do as a university student, you would take on the roles that our graduates would take on. You'd be working directly with our partners, you'd be working directly with our clients, and you'd be finding out loads not only about our business, but also about the clients that we work with, the different sectors that we cover as well. With the school leaver work experience, that's slightly different. So we do it over a shorter period of time. It's a week's work experience, and it's a fully immersive case study week. So again, you get really familiar with the type of clients that we work with. You're given real life client work that you might expect to work on as a school leaver. And you get to meet people within the organisation as well. So people that might have come through the same route as you, or people that might have come from various different firms. So if you can get work experience, it's a really great opportunity for you to do so. We've had some questions recently around whether virtual internships carry the same sort of merit. Absolutely. If you can secure yourself a virtual internship, now is a brilliant time to do that. Internships are obviously becoming much more difficult, and how we can work that around COVID-19. And a number of firms are now looking at offering those virtual internships. So if you can secure yourself one of those, it's a brilliant time for you to be able to do that. And then finally, we'll just look at the careers fairs. So I imagine all of you in some capacity have heard about careers fairs. They exist within schools and they exist within university. It's definitely a presence that's got larger at schools. I think when I was at school, you never really had a careers fair, and we were pushed much more towards university. It's much more balanced now, and you get to find out a little bit about university life and working life at the same time. Those careers fairs offer you a really good opportunity to understand the business world, the markets that we work in. If you know what industry you want to go into, particularly at universities, they will have sector-specific careers fairs, and it's a good opportunity for you to go and speak with your career service team and find out whether they host these and when they might be. If you know where you want to go into, a career service is a great point for you to go and find out what companies are within the industry that you want to go into. It's a really great place for you to find out the positioning of different firms and also their values, so whether they align with yours, whether that's somewhere that you could see working. It's also a brilliant opportunity for you to build your networks. So if you meet some people at these careers fairs that you think will be really helpful to you further down the line when you're going for interviews, make sure you're handing out your cards, make sure that you're asking for their details and can follow up with them later. It'll also be interesting to see how over the next academic year those careers fairs are going to run. It may be that they go virtually as well, so they'll be much more easily accessible, and they're ones that you can obviously join online, but the same points will still apply in terms of trying to make those connections, finding out what companies offer and understanding the market around them. I'm going to move over to Ursula now, who's going to fill you in on what you should be doing at the point that you're making applications to roles.
Thanks, Louise. So as Louise mentioned, we're now going to go through sort of what to do 6 months before. So it is worth noting that most application processes for graduate and school leavers can take, I would say, between 4 and 6 months. Sometimes it might be a little bit less, sometimes a little bit longer, sorry, just depending, I guess, on the organisation and the sector that you're applying to. So as you can see, there is 5 points on the screen at the moment. Some of those points are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but I am going to focus on 2 points. So one of those points being the Google Alerts, and the second point being the understanding of the political and social landscape. So the first one with Google Alerts. So Google Alerts is something that I actually personally hadn't heard of when I was at university, and since using Google Alerts, it's something I really wish that someone had made me aware of. So for those of you that are unsure as to what Google Alerts are, essentially you can register your interest for Google Alerts, and you can register your interest for common themes. So whether that common theme is accountancy and finance, it could be engineering, it could be HR and recruitment, it could be the healthcare sector, whatever that common theme is, you can register your interest to receive active updates the minute sort of a news report or any up-to-date about that sector is released. So it's a really good way to actively keep up to date with everything. The second thing that you can do with Google Alerts, so it's a little bit more smarter than just registering for the common themes. So you can actually register your interest for alerts from that specific organisation. So if you wanted to register for alerts from, let's just say, Grant Thornton, you can sign up and tailor that just to specifically receive alerts anytime any news is released about the organisation. So it's a really good way to actively keep up to date throughout the application process and maybe even before you apply as well. The second point then we're going to focus on is the understanding political and social landscape, as I mentioned. So with this point, it is really important not to underestimate the impact that politics has on businesses and vice versa. So let's take Brexit, for example. That has had a massive impact on how and the way that businesses work in today's world, and also how businesses plan to work in the future. And then in terms of like social landscape, for example, so let's just take the current situation with COVID-19, that's having such an impact on our economy. Some companies are doing really well from the impact of COVID, and some are doing not so good. And therefore, you really need to be aware as to how important it is, the impact that that's having, not only in the industry that you're applying to, but also that industry's clients. So it is really important that you are fully up to date with everything that is going on in today's world at the moment. So now I'm going to move on to Louise, and she will run through what to do sort of 1 week before your interview around commercial awareness.
Thanks, so you may be sitting on the line, you might have an interview next week and you're suddenly thinking, I haven't done any of the bits that you've mentioned so far. Have I left it too late? There are still some bits that you can do a week before your interview if you haven't prepared already. If you have prepared already, brilliant. There are still some bits that you should be doing a week before your interview, and we're going to run through what some of those might be now. So the first one is an absolute basic, and I would encourage every single person that is going for an interview to do this the week before their interview, and that is to Google the firm and click on the news section of your Google tab, or whichever search engine it is that you like to use. Click on the news section and find out what has been in the press recently about the firm that you're applying to. That's an absolute minimum that you should be taking with you to your interviews, particularly at graduate or school leaver level, and be able to confidently talk about some of the bits that have been in the press. You can see on our second point here, I've covered, should we talk about bad press? All too often, having worked in recruitment for a long time, people have a real fear of mentioning bad press when they go to an interview. It would be almost impossible for any firm to escape any bad press throughout their whole existence. So at some point there is going to be bad press with firms, and it's absolutely okay for you to mention that at interview. It's all about how you phrase it and how you word it. So first of all, match it with some good press that you might have read, match it with some opportunities that you might have read about the firm as well. Really balance your view. So think about, okay, I've seen some bad press about this firm. Why does that make it an interesting place to join? So you might think it's an interesting place to join because it's in the middle of a real transition period. There's real opportunity for growth within the firm. There might be a different focus. So within the accountancy sector, there's a massive focus at the minute on audit quality. And you might be somebody that actually is really passionate about getting your work right and getting the quality of your work to the best it can be. And if you're someone that feels like that, saying that kind of thing in an interview is a really positive step. But I would say not addressing the bad press at all is potentially a mistake going into the interview, because they may think that you've not read it. But like I said before, balance it with the positive stuff that you've read. Think about the opportunities that brings and how you can then articulate that to the assessors. And then the last one that I'm going to mention on this slide is around linking in with contacts from your networking. So you might have met a really great recruiter. You might have met somebody at a careers fair that's left a lasting impression on you. You might have done some work experience where you've made some connections there, or you might have connected with people on LinkedIn. And Eric's going to speak a little bit more about how you can best utilize LinkedIn a little bit later in the personal brand section. Use those connections at this point. At Grant Thornton, we offer a buddy system, so anybody that's coming through to an interview with us are paired up with a buddy. Now, a week before your interview is a really great time to be connecting with the people that you've met at various touch points throughout the process. You can ask them about what some of the business challenges are, who their clients are. So each office that you apply to is likely to have a different client. If you're applying to a national firm, find out about the sectors that we're working with and what some of the opportunities might be for growth, as well as some of the real focus areas for that business. We're going to move on to the next slide, which is looking at some specific questions that you might get asked when you go to an interview. So we've pulled these together. They're not ones that we would ask personally at Grant Thornton, although we have asked similar things to this in the past and probably will do in the future. So I'll hand over to Ursula, who's going to talk you through the first question and how you might go about answering that if you were in an interview situation.
Perfect, thank you. So the first question we're going to focus on, as we've mentioned, is the top one. So I'll just read through the question quickly and sort of how we would break that down, and then we will move on to the second question that you can see on the screen. So from your research, what do you think makes us stand out from our competitors, and why does that make you want to apply? So with this question, I personally would probably break this down into two parts. So with the first part being all around why you stand out from the competitors, and then the second part being sort of what makes you want to apply to that organisation. So firstly, around the competitors then, so it's really important that going into an interview, you are fully aware as to who that organisation's competitors are. So you can find this information on the organisation's websites, for example, careers fairs, news reports. It could be on LinkedIn. You might see different people posting in relation to different organisations. So there is lots of ways that you can find out who that organisation's competitors are. It is also really important, so sort of understand who the competitors are, but also understand in that organisation's place in the market, so where they sit size-wise, and also the clients that we work with. In relation to that as well, it's also important to research the company's unique selling points, so their USPs, so what makes them different. And then in terms of why you want to apply to that organisation, so really do have a think as to what makes that company different to you as an individual. So fully research their values and culture and be aware of what they stand for. Also have a think as to what the benefits might be for joining that firm. So there is lots of benefits, but I'm just going to run through three really quickly. So it could be that maybe you get more exposure to a number of clients. It could be that it might be exciting times within a startup organisation that might really thrive you, and it could be as well that maybe you just get regular work with financial directors. But again, it's really important to remember that the interviewers don't expect you to know everything going into an interview, but understanding those pinch areas within the market will really help you going forward. So we'll now move on to the second question, Louise, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So the second question is probably a topic that's been on the tip of all your tongues over the past few weeks, and that's COVID-19. So if you're anything like me, you can't join a phone call with your family, a Zoom call with your friends. We joined this morning on this webinar, and the first thing that we talk about is COVID-19 and the impact that it's having on us as individuals. That will be no different if over the next few weeks you have virtual interviews or virtual assessment days scheduled. even if you're not asked specific questions about it, it's almost inevitably going to come up in conversation. And if it doesn't, it's a great opportunity for you to ask the question about how that business is coping, how it's finding the relationships it has with its clients in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. So the question that we have in front of us is, what impact could the COVID-19 global pandemic have on our business and our clients, and how can we support them through this? So much like Ursula's, this is a three-part question. The first is really understanding what impact that global pandemic is having on the economy in general. So there are some businesses that are absolutely thriving within this pandemic. So that may be organisations that develop PPE, that could be organisations that are perhaps smaller businesses that stock food and produce that are doing particularly well, or it could be other organisations that are larger, so things like supermarkets, etc. The second part is organisations that perhaps aren't doing so well, so those that are really struggling in the current climate, ones that perhaps are finding it particularly difficult at the moment, they've had to stop trading entirely. So understanding sort of a global context, much larger context on how that applies. The second part is around the businesses and the clients that we work with. So understanding how it could impact us as a business and the client group that we work with. So what are the organisations that we work with at Grant Thornton, as an example, that would have an impact on how we work and the impact that the COVID-19 might be having on them. And then the final part is how we can support them through this. So in order to answer this question, you need to know briefly the kind of service lines that we offer. So what are the service lines that we offer at Grant Thornton, and how can that help various clients depending on how well or how poorly the business is working at the minute? So have a think of all of those elements and really bring that into answering the question. It will really help you, and it will really be able to set you apart in terms of answering those questions from the business. We're going to hand over now to our colleague Eric Rivas, who is the Employer Brand Manager within our Marketing and Business Development team. Hi, Eric.
Hello.
He's going to talk you through personal brand, and I will hand over to him imminently.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks, Ursula. I learned so much myself actually watching that. I think I'm going to be actually more commercially aware. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. My name is Eric Rivas, as Urs and Lou mentioned. I'm the Employer Brand Manager for Grant Thornton. I work on a different team than Louise and Ursula. I work within the marketing and business development team here. My job is a bit different, but I work really closely with Urs and Lou and the rest of the recruiting team, which is within Employer Brand, we look at how people perceive us as an employer to work for, and how we communicate to job seekers, perhaps just like yourself, what it's really like to work at Grant Thornton. I've been working here for 2 years. If you are trying to guess my accent, I am from California, living here in London, however. So today we're going to talk about what is personal brand. And what I'm going to start off with is talking about where it first came from, what it means. So there's a person by the name of Tom Peters, who actually was the one to coin the word personal brand. And he wrote a book called Be Your Own Brand. And if you're interested in this topic, I would highly recommend having a look at that book. It might be something you're interested in. But I really like the way he positions personal brand. And thinking on what's on the screen here, he kind of breaks it down very simple, saying you are a brand. So the way you are perceived by other people is your brand, and you are the only one that's in charge of that brand. So think about how other people perceive you. Think about the way that you want to be perceived, and that ultimately is your brand. And what I really like about his definition is that there is no single path to success. So we're not here to tell you what your personal brand should be. We're here to kind of talk to you about how that should be developed, and based off of what your end goals are, what company you might want to work for, what the future you want. It might be a personal brand that you kind of build yourself, and whatever brand that is, as long as you're okay with it, that is the personal brand that you'll build. Um, and and so yeah, when we talk about that there is no one right way to create that brand you. So it's all about kind of what your own personal brand should be, based off of your own goals. So if we move on, and starting to talk about understanding how to build your brand, we want you to ask yourself a few questions. The first one being, how would others describe me? So take a step back and think about, if you ask people like your friends, your family, your teachers, think about how they would describe you as a person. Think about the interactions that you have with them, and think about the qualities and values that they would talk about, that you have. Which leads me on to the next point, which is, what are my values? So think about the values that you want to uphold. Is it certain things like trust? And if you think about the way that you are perceived by other people, are you communicating that that trust or that value that you care about? Values are also important when you start to talk about the values that the companies that you're interviewing uphold. So can you match your values with companies that hold the same values? Because that's really important. The next one is, what are my personal drivers? So what kind of motivates you? I know what motivates me is about like building something from nothing. So looking at something that kind of has an end goal, a finish line, and there's a kind of an obstacle or a challenge that I need to overcome. And that really helps me, kind of motivates me to want to do that. So I need a job, or I need a project that is challenging, and that allows me to be innovative. And that's what motivates me, and that's what drives me to be successful. So when you start to think about what your personal brand is, think about what drives you. And the last one is what makes you different. So, if you think about Grant Thornton ourselves, each year for the last couple of years, we've been hiring about 400 to 500 graduates and school leavers each year. But within that, we get about over 12,000 applications. So how do you stand out out of 12,000 other applications? It is difficult. We're not going to say it's easy, but it's important that you ask yourself that first before you go into an interview, because that helps you start to communicate the way that you want to be perceived by that company. And if you're not confident about what makes you different, then it's going to be really difficult for you to communicate that to others. So ask yourself these 4 questions. We will send you this recording so you can screenshot this, but really write it down. Just don't think about it in your head, write it down. And that will help you kind of start building out what your personal brand is. So now that you have these, and now you need to kind of communicate them. It does no good if you know what your personal brand is, but no one else does, because the end goal here is so that way you can kind of build this brand to lead you to success, whether that be a future job, or making friendships, or communicating better with your family. Whatever that end goal is, your personal brand is really important. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but I will pick a few out here on ways that you can communicate it. The first one is, which is really important, which is your everyday interactions with others. You can talk about your personal brand, but at the end of the day, your actions speak louder. So think about the way you interact with people, your friends, family, teachers, your potential future coworkers. The actions you take are really important, because they're going to be what people think about you, especially when you're meeting people that have never met you. They're going to have to try to understand what your personal brand is within minutes of meeting you, right? So think about the interactions with others on communicating your brand. The next one, which is really important, and I think a lot of people understand the importance of this now, and I'm sure your teachers and family and parents have mentioned, having a LinkedIn profile. This has become really popular amongst students and starting to build that kind of connections and network on LinkedIn and your brand there. Remember what we talked about earlier in terms of there is no single path to success. So the point of LinkedIn obviously is a business community. So the way you might communicate your personal brand on LinkedIn might be different from the way you might communicate it on Facebook or TikTok or anything like that. And so, but it might not also be different. So, you know, if your future goal is to be a professional sports person or a sports broadcaster or work for a company like Red Bull or something like that, it might be different for somebody else who's looking at an accountancy career or somebody who's interested in finance. You know, it really depends on what your end goal is. So when you think about what picture you put on LinkedIn, think about what personal brand you want to put out there. You know, when you think about what skills that you list on LinkedIn, which highly recommend following the interactive tool LinkedIn has to fill out like skills, your past experience. And if you don't have experience, you know, you can put things like hobbies or things that you're passionate about, volunteer work. We had a whole session recently on, you know, what to put on your CV and things like that, which I would recommend going and watch the recording on our website. But that will help you kind of start to build out your personal brand on LinkedIn. And the last thing is letting your personal brand come through on your CV. So obviously, a lot of people might not have the experience, professional experience that they need to put on their CV, but that's okay because a lot of people are in the same boat there. So think about how that personal brand and the values that you have kind of come through on that. So moving along here, we want to leave you off with 5 tips, and then we'll come into Q&A. So the 5 tips that will leave you with personal brand is number 1 is be consistent. It's easier said than done, right? So think about if you are trying to have a personal brand of being punctual, someone that somebody can rely on. You know, if all of a sudden, you know, somebody has a good, you know, you're talking about being punctual and being reliable, but then perhaps you are, you know, late to the interview, that might kind of speak to a different personal brand that you're trying to portray. And like I said earlier, is actions speak louder than words. So really try to be consistent. Think about multiple ways that you can promote your brand, like writing a blog or creating a website with projects that you've done in the past, even if it's school projects or personal projects. We look at different, when you come to an interview at Grant Thornton, I know that some actually do share their personal websites with us. And actually the people interviewing you do take the time to look at that because, you know, it does make you stand out. So perhaps think about things that you've done in the past that you can kind of build. And it doesn't have to be creating a website. It can be as easy as communicating that on LinkedIn as well. Number 3, just don't think about you know, the business end. Think about your own community and the ways that you can impact there. There's great things like volunteering, especially nowadays, where you know there's a lot of great emphasis around volunteering. You never know who you can meet through that, and you never know that, you know, that sort of kind of actions that you can put on your CV later will be very beneficial to you. The 4th tip is something that I highly recommend doing. Put yourself in the shoes of somebody that's never met you and just try Googling yourself, do some research, see what people can find. You know, see what kind of photos that you thought were private but are actually public that you might want to make sure that, you know, are hidden in case that somebody who you're trying to really communicate a certain personal brand to finds those. And, you know, and it's important for you to know what is kind of found online for yourself. And the last one is something that might be a little awkward when you do the first time, but is like gather feedback from people. Think about friends, family, or teachers. Ask them to write down 3 qualities they think of you. You might be surprised, you know, you might be thinking that you're putting off a certain brand, but they might be telling you different qualities that you didn't know you're putting off. And so all 5 of these tips will help you kind of maintain that personal brand going forward. So with that, one of our colleagues, Rashnara, is going to pop on the line now. You should been asking questions in the question box, and she's going to be collating them and asking myself, Louise, and Ursula those questions. So feel free to ask them right now as well.
Hi, thanks, Eric, and thank you everybody for those for that. That's really useful. Everybody, thank you for your questions. We're going to try to get through as much as possible. So if we don't answer them on the webinar, we will try and get back to you. So first question, this one's for you, Louise and Ursula. What advice would you give on how to approach a company to get work experience?
Do you want me to go first, Ursula, and then?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of companies will advertise their work experience on their website. So I would always say that's the first port of call. Have a look much earlier than you would anticipate. So for example, when we do our 6-week internships, we're actually recruiting for those from the Christmas before. So it's much longer than you might anticipate, and it's quite similar to that graduate process because we do offer that conversion. It takes a little bit longer. In terms of communicating out, if you can't find anything online that's of interest to you, then just drop in polite emails to various organisations. We receive some emails that ask for individual work experience. We don't offer work experience on an ad hoc basis, but then what we do is we keep those names and we make sure we're adding them to a database so that when we do have those work experience opportunities, we're emailing out to those guys first that have approached us to really tell them what we're offering and how they can go about applying for those. Ursula, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really good point, Louise, just around just be aware that companies do advertise their work experience opportunities a while in advance. So, you know, when I think of work experience, sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe it'll be like 2 weeks before, but that's not the case. As Louise mentioned, our internships, we actually start, you know, recruiting for them around between October and December. And then with our school work experience, although that might take place in October, that is something that we do start recruiting for in May. So I think a lot of organisations might be pretty similar as well in the fact that they do recruit sort of quite a few months in advance.
Okay, great. Thank you both. So this one's for Eric and Louise. What is the best way to get your personal brand across in either a CV or an application?
Sure. I'll kind of start, Louise, and you can kind of add on if there's anything that you want to talk about. The first thing I'll say is like think about those 4 questions that we asked about kind of building that brand. Think about one big thing is volunteering. What we mentioned is actions speak louder than words. So things that you've done in the past. You know, if you're looking to get a job either a year from now or even 6 months from now, think about what you can do right now that you can put on your CV that speaks to the qualities that you want to be perceived by that company. So if that's volunteering, that's a good one. If that's, you know, even the smallest thing about like building, you know, building something online that you want to show that you have kind of tech skills, you know, these are all things that, you know, you have capabilities of doing right now. So don't be afraid to kind of add those things in replacement of any past experience, business experience that you might have, and communicate them. I think that's the biggest thing that people kind of forget is that you have tools like LinkedIn to share that earlier. So don't just wait till it's time for your CV. Like start sharing things online, sharing articles that you've researched, maybe write an article on LinkedIn that you're passionate about. Those are the small things that you can add links to on your CV for people to kind of get an understanding of where your head's at with certain topics. So for example, like even right now, if you're interested in like the impact COVID-19 is having on the industry and it's maybe affected you, you can kind of write that into an article on LinkedIn, and later when you're applying, you can link that to your CV, and actually that gives kind of more depth and creation and an ability for people to understand who you are and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to that, Eric, is just around having that confidence to put things on your CV or your application form that really make you different. So I have an example that I'm sure this person wouldn't mind me using, and I'll obviously not name names through the example. But I had someone approach me who had submitted an application to Grant Thornton, hadn't been successful, and when I reviewed their application, it was an okay application. There was nothing really that set them apart. So I was having a conversation with this individual, and it actually transpired through the conversations I was having with them that they were a refugee and they'd come over to the UK with their sister. And I was looking at their application and I was thinking, you've not included that anywhere on your application. Some of the skills that you have developed from coming over on your own and with your sister and starting from scratch and finding employment, they're really things that are going to set this person apart. And they'd always thought that they shouldn't write that on their CV or their application because they thought it might be a disadvantage to them. We have similar situations where people are carers and they don't put that on their applications or their CVs because for some reason they think that that might be used against them in an application process. But the kind of skills that you get from these real life scenarios are the things that we would really encourage you to have confidence to be putting on your applications and your CVs if you have them, because they're things that give you such great skills across the board and that obviously transpire when you're coming into the workplace as well. Back over to you, Russ.
All right, thanks, Lou. That was great. Just to let everybody know, we will be adding a couple of extra minutes on the end for a few more questions. So this next one, Lou or Ursula, how do I show my personal brand at a networking event or a careers fair?
I think for me, it's what Eric's mentioned earlier around that consistency piece. So that personal brand, and it's the same when you go for an interview or when you go for an assessment day, that personal brand needs to be consistent with every person that you meet. So whether that is the receptionist who takes your coat when you come into a networking event, or whether that's the partner that you're speaking with when you're asking questions about their presentation, all too often when we have assessment days, we have people that convey totally different brands to myself as the recruiter and then to the assessor. Whereas actually, at the end of the day, we all sit around together and we all talk about your performance throughout the whole day. And that's the same at a networking event. So making sure that personal brand is consistent, thinking of those commercial awareness questions that we asked, that we spoke about earlier. So what are some of the things in the business world that you can generate conversation around to really set yourself apart? And just making sure that you're following up to an appropriate level. So after the network event or after you've been to the interview, maybe drop in a note over email just to reiterate that you've had a really positive experience and that you really enjoyed meeting people, and just making sure that you're following up that brand from the minute that you meet the receptionist at the front door right the way through to when the event's finished and you've sent that follow-up email.
Oh,
Should we move
great.
on to the next question, Des?
Yeah, next one. So thank you. So Eric, this one's more for you. Does not having a LinkedIn account put me at a disadvantage? And what other useful tools are there as an alternative, if you know of any?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't. I would say, in it's we're not telling you to actually. You have to create a LinkedIn profile. Everybody has their own opinion as to whether that's helpful or not helpful for them, and it might not fit with kind of your own, personality to want one. So I wouldn't say it doesn't. I wouldn't say that it puts you at a disadvantage. It does put you at an advantage, but there are other ways that you can do certain things to kind of help still make you stand out, such as, like I mentioned earlier, is having a blog. So you might not like having a LinkedIn profile, but you might also enjoy doing perhaps blogs, you might enjoy doing videos, you might enjoy creating a website or sharing your projects on different social media platforms, such as Twitter is also a great one if you wanted to share certain things about yourself there. So there are other ways to make sure that you're communicating your personal brand. From my own personal standpoint, I would say that do something, because again, like we mentioned, you're going to be wanting to stand out from a lot of people and that are sending applications. So it is important that you kind of go a little above beyond and maybe step out of your comfort level to communicate that, because a lot of people know what their personal brand is, but at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is communicate something to somebody that's never met you. So, step out of your comfort levels and try something new. And you might be surprised with finding something that you actually are really passionate about.
I think from a recruiter standpoint on that, so 10 years ago when I joined Grant Thornton in the early careers team, we never ever would use LinkedIn for for early careers recruitment. It was always much more dominated by the experienced hire market. Now it's something we use quite heavily, so advertising all our roles, we advertise this webinar through there, and there are things that we do constantly on LinkedIn to keep you guys informed. So it's not only really used as a personal brand tool, but also a tool to really keep you informed of any roles, etc., that come up. So I think now we are out of time on the webinar. Thank you all for your attendance today and any questions that you submitted. Our final webinar is going to be running this time next week, and that's around careers in accountancy. So please do sign up to that if that's something you're interested in. As I mentioned before, any questions that we haven't had chance to answer today, we will follow up with over the next couple of weeks so that you can see answers to those. Thank you everybody for joining. Stay safe and well, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.